now, what is it, 22, 23 years in existence. We've been building cars for the last 15, 16 years to customers and growing along the way, step by step, going from extremely small to still fairly, well, a very small car manufacturer.
At 5 years old, Christian von Koenigsegg watched a film about a bicycle repairman who built his own race car and won. Most kids forget movies like that within a week. He didn't. 17 years later, against the advice of almost everyone around him, he started a hypercar company from a small Swedish workshop, a country with no history of building anything like it. He was laughed at. Decades later, on his 50th birthday, he didn't book a vacation. He built a hypercar, 50 units strong, one for every year of his life. How does a childhood film turn into an entire legacy brand? Let's find out. The childhood spark that built a hypercar empire.
My name is Christian von Koenigsegg. For half of my life, I've been on the quest to be a leader in the hypercar industry.
Every legend has a beginning small enough to seem unremarkable at the time. And Christian von Koenigsegg's begins at 5 years old, sitting in front of a stop-motion film about a bicycle repairman who builds his own racing car and somehow wins against impossible odds. That film, a quiet Norwegian production about persistence and homemade ambition, planted something in him that never fully went away. Most children watch a movie like that and forget it by the following week. Christian carried it with him for the rest of his life. It is worth pausing on just how unusual that kind of lasting impression is. Most childhood inspirations fade quietly into nostalgia, the kind of thing someone might mention once at a dinner party and then never think about again. For Christian, that single film became something closer to a blueprint, a permanent reference point he would return to again and again throughout his adult life. Even decades later, when describing the earliest go-kart ride he experienced at 6 years old, he would describe it as one of the best days of his life. A small detail that reveals just how early and how deeply his relationship with machines and speed had already taken root. By his teenage years, that fascination had turned into something more hands-on. He was already known around his town as the person who could tune a moped better than anyone else, the kind of kid who took apart toasters and video recorders simply to understand how they worked and whether they could be made better. This was not a passing curiosity. It was the early shape of a mind that would later spend decades refusing to accept that something could not be improved. Before cars, there was an idea about flooring. At 19 years old, Christian invented a way to join floorboards together without nails or adhesive.
So to nail down a hardwood floor, we have to install a subfloor system. We start by laying a moisture barrier over the concrete to protect your floor from moisture.
A simple clicking mechanism he proudly presented to his father-in-law, who ran a flooring factory in Belgium. The idea was rejected outright. Surely, he was told, if this worked, someone would have invented it already. Within a few years, other companies patented strikingly similar designs, and that exact concept grew into a multi-billion-dollar global flooring industry. Christian had been right. He simply was not believed yet. A pattern that would repeat itself, on a much larger scale, just a few years later. That pattern is worth sitting with for a moment. How many people experience the sting of being right too early, only to watch someone else claim the credit? For most, that kind of disappointment becomes a reason to play it safer the next time. For Christian, it became fuel. Rather than chasing another business idea simply because it might succeed, he made a decision that seemed, on paper, far less rational than building flooring systems. He decided to build his dream car instead. A fully realized, world-class sports car, designed and engineered from nothing, in a country that had never produced anything like it. There is something worth noting about the environment he grew up in, because it shapes how unlikely this entire story really is. Christian was raised in Stockholm, attended high school in Danderyd, and later studied at a boarding school, before going on to study economics at a school in Brussels. Nothing in that academic path pointed toward automotive engineering. He had no formal training in chassis design, aerodynamics, or powertrain development. What he had instead was decades of self-taught curiosity, a habit of dismantling machines simply to understand them, and an absolute refusal to accept that something was impossible simply because no one in his country had attempted it before. The reaction from the established automotive world was almost exactly what you would expect. Sweden's reputation in the industry was built on safety and reliability, not high-performance exotic engineering. The idea of a 22-year-old founding a hypercar company from a small workshop, with no major manufacturer's backing and no formal training in automotive design, struck most observers as somewhere between naive and absurd. He was laughed at, by his own account, by people who simply could not picture the outcome he was already imagining clearly in his own mind. It would have been easy, at this point, to quietly fold the idea and return to something safer. Plenty of ambitious projects die exactly this way, smothered by polite skepticism long before they ever reach a prototype stage. But the same stubbornness that had carried Christian through his flooring invention, the same refusal to accept a closed door as a final answer, carried him directly into the next chapter of his life. One that would take years of invisible, unglamorous work before the rest of the world ever noticed. Building a legend from nothing. Belief alone does not build a hypercar. In 1994, Christian launched what he called the Koenigsegg project, financed initially through money earned from his earlier business ventures and a contribution of $200,000 from a Swedish technical development board. It was not close to enough to build a competitive performance vehicle from scratch, and everyone around him seemed to know it. His father, however, saw something worth investing in, eventually stepping in as an early backer and helping finance the operation for more than 3 years, while the team worked towards something the rest of the industry assumed would never materialize. Working alongside designer David Crawford, Christian translated his own original sketches into an actual design concept. And from that concept came the first prototype, the foundation everything else would eventually be built on top of. Progress was slow, methodical, and largely invisible to the outside world. There were no major announcements, no flashy unveilings. Just a small team in Sweden, working toward a goal that almost nobody outside the workshop believed was achievable. The operation grew slightly less lonely in 2000, when Halldora von Koenigsegg became involved in the company as chief operating officer, taking on a role that would prove essential to the business actually surviving long enough to deliver a finished product. Building a hypercar from nothing requires more than engineering talent. It requires someone managing the practical realities of a company running on a fraction of the resources available to established manufacturers. And Halldora's involvement marked the moment the project began transforming from a passionate side pursuit into something resembling an actual, sustainable business. The breakthrough finally arrived in 2000, when Christian presented the all-new Koenigsegg CC8S at the Paris Motor Show.
We are having this 25th anniversary this year and a new car model, and I couldn't think of any better way than honoring my great father for all his help and just for being a great guy.
Stunning an industry that had spent years assuming this project would quietly disappear. 2 years later, in 2002, the first customer car was delivered to a buyer in Switzerland. Proof that the company was not simply a passion project, but an actual functioning manufacturer capable of delivering a finished product to a paying customer. Was anyone still laughing at this point? Some certainly were, but the laughter was getting quieter. Then, in 2005, just 3 years after that first delivery, Koenigsegg broke the production car top speed record. a record that had been held for years by McLaren, one of the most respected names in performance engineering anywhere in the world. For a company that had been dismissed as an impossible dream barely a decade earlier, this was not just a milestone. It was vindication, delivered in the most public way possible, on a stage where reputation and bragging rights had been earned by some of the most storied manufacturers in automotive history. Consider the gap being closed at that moment. McLaren had spent decades building one of the most recognizable names in motorsport and performance engineering, backed by resources and institutional knowledge that a small Swedish startup could not begin to match on paper. And yet here was Koenigsegg, barely 10 years removed from a single sketch and a rejected flooring patent, taking that exact record for itself. News of the achievement spread quickly through automotive circles, and for the first time, conversations about Koenigsegg stopped framing the company as a curiosity and started treating it as a genuine contender. From that point forward, the story of Koenigsegg shifted from underdog curiosity to legitimate rival among the world's most respected performance brands. Innovations followed steadily over the years that came after. Patented technologies like the Koenigsegg direct drive system and the light-speed transmission, along with composite engineering breakthroughs such as the air-core hollow carbon fiber chassis, each one reinforcing the idea that this was not a company coasting on an early lucky break. It was a company still pushing, still refining, still operating with the same restless curiosity that had defined its founder since childhood. By the time the broader hypercar world had fully absorbed what Koenigsegg had accomplished, the comparison points had shifted entirely. This was no longer a Swedish curiosity being measured against established names out of obligation. It was a manufacturer being mentioned in the same breath as Bugatti, McLaren, and Pagani, on its own merit. A remarkable outcome for a company that had started with little more than a childhood memory, a rejected flooring patent, and $200,000 of development funding. Every record broken and every patent filed only deepened a simple truth that had been true since the very beginning. Christian had never been chasing a hobby. He had been building a legacy, one stubborn decision at a time. The birthday that became a blueprint. Fast forward to 2022, and Christian von Koenigsegg turned 50 years old. For most people, a milestone birthday like that might mean a trip somewhere far away, a quiet celebration with family, or simply an acknowledgement that another decade had passed. For the man who built an entire automotive company out of stubborn belief and a childhood movie, 50 meant something else entirely. It meant building a car. Not just any car either. The result was the Koenigsegg CC850, a hypercar conceived specifically as a tribute to the milestone, deliberately designed with retro styling that pulled directly from the brand's own history. Most notably, the CC8S, the same car that had stunned Paris back in 2000, now reimagined 2 decades later, with everything the company had learned in between. It was simultaneously a celebration of where the brand started, and a demonstration of how far it had come. The production plan itself carried a quiet, deliberate symbolism. Koenigsegg initially planned to build exactly 50 units of the CC850, one for each year of Christian's life. It is the kind of detail that could easily be dismissed as a marketing gimmick, except for how consistent it is with everything else about the man. A builder who has always treated milestones as opportunities to create something tangible rather than simply mark time passing. But demand for the car ended up exceeding even Koenigsegg's own expectations, and the production run was ultimately expanded to 70 units. A fitting problem for a brand built entirely on underestimating how much the world would eventually want what it was building. What does it say about a person that their idea of an ideal 50th birthday gift is something engineered down to the smallest carbon fiber detail, rather than something simply bought off a shelf? For Christian, the answer seems obvious in hindsight. This was never going to be a man who outsourced his biggest milestones to someone else's product. If he was going to mark 50 years on Earth with something meaningful, it was always going to be something his own team had built, piece by piece, the same way the entire company had been built in the first place. There is a quiet kind of confidence in choosing to celebrate a milestone this way. Most people, even highly successful ones, mark their 50th birthdays by purchasing something that already exists. A watch, a car from another brand, a trip somewhere far away. Christian's approach inverted that entire idea. Rather than buying a symbol of success, he built one from scratch, applying decades of accumulated engineering knowledge to a project that existed purely because he wanted it to. That is not a small distinction. It reflects exactly the same instinct that drove him to start the company in the first place. The belief that if something does not exist yet in the form you want, the answer is simply to build it yourself. Inside the machine. Strip away the symbolism for a moment, and the CC850 stands on its own as a genuine engineering achievement, not simply a sentimental gesture. At its core sits a 5-liter, twin-turbocharged V8 engine capable of producing roughly 1,350 horsepower on E85 fuel, and still delivering around 1,100 horsepower on standard pump fuel. Paired with a curb weight of approximately 1,350 kilograms, the CC850 achieves a power-to-weight ratio that approaches a remarkable 1-to-1. A figure that places it among the most extreme performance machines ever built for road use. Achieving that balance means eliminating nearly every gram of unnecessary weight and inefficiency most manufacturers simply accept as the cost of doing business.
In this facility, we really have a lot of experts that before they came here maybe 10, 15 years ago, they didn't have a lot of experience, and now they're really experts in their field. We kind of create this industry from scratch.
Koenigsegg, true to form, accepted none of it. Perhaps the most striking engineering decision involves the transmission itself. Rather than choosing between a traditional manual gearbox or a modern automatic system, Koenigsegg's engineers built a transmission capable of offering both experiences within a single unit: full manual control for drivers who want it, and seamless automatic operation for those who prefer it. Combining these two fundamentally different driving philosophies into one cohesive system is the kind of problem most manufacturers would consider not worth solving. For a company built on refusing conventional limitations, it was simply another puzzle waiting to be cracked. What truly separates Koenigsegg from almost every other manufacturer at this level is how much of the car is actually built in-house. With the exception of computer microchips and the leather used inside the cabin, nearly every component of the CC850, body panels, mechanical systems, even the smallest detail pieces, is produced internally at Koenigsegg's own facility in Sweden. Most manufacturers, even some of the most prestigious names in the industry, outsource significant portions of production to third-party suppliers. Koenigsegg's insistence on keeping nearly everything under one roof reflects the same obsessive attention to detail that has defined Christian's approach since he was a teenager, taking apart machinery just to understand how it worked. That philosophy comes with real costs. Building components in-house rather than sourcing them from established suppliers means slower production, smaller volumes, and a far higher price tag attached to every finished car. It also means there is no outside vendor to blame when something goes wrong. For a smaller manufacturer competing against companies with far larger budgets and supply chains, that level of control is either a tremendous advantage or an enormous risk, depending entirely on whether the engineering holds up under pressure. At Koenigsegg, it consistently has. The carbon fiber chassis underpinning the CC850 borrows from the platform originally developed for the Koenigsegg Jesko. Yet the finished car prioritizes something different from outright speed alone. Bespoke luggage, a removable targa-top roof for open-air driving, and an interior built without a single piece of plastic, all point toward a vehicle designed around experience and craftsmanship as much as raw numbers. The CC850 was never meant to simply be the fastest car Koenigsegg could build. It was meant to be the most complete expression of everything the company had learned how to build well. That distinction matters more than it might first appear. Plenty of manufacturers can chase a single record-breaking number and build a marketing campaign around it. Far fewer combine extreme performance with genuine everyday usability. A car you could pack for a weekend trip, drive roof-off on a clear afternoon, and still trust for some of the industry's most extreme performance figures. Achieving both at once requires engineering discipline well beyond chasing horsepower for its own sake, reflecting exactly the well-rounded ambition that has defined Koenigsegg since its earliest days. 50 years, one vision, one return. Every detail of the CC850's design connects back to a single moment: the unveiling of the CC8S at the Paris Motor Show more than 2 decades earlier. The car that first proved Christian von Koenigsegg's vision could survive contact with the real world. The CC850's silhouette deliberately echoes that original shape, along with influences from the CCR that followed it, creating something that feels less like a brand new product and more like a direct continuation of a story that began in a small Swedish workshop. Why build a tribute to your own beginning, rather than simply pushing forward with the next purely forward-looking model? For Christian, the answer seems tied to something deeper than nostalgia. This is a man whose entire career has been shaped by proving doubters wrong, by transforming a moment of public laughter into one of the most respected performance brands in the world. Returning to that original design, 2 decades and 1 world record later, was not a step backward. It was a deliberate acknowledgement of exactly how far the company had traveled since that first prototype came together in a workshop nobody outside the team believed in. There is also something worth considering about what this choice says to the people who have followed the brand since its earliest days. For longtime enthusiasts, watching a small Swedish manufacturer survive its skeptical beginnings, break a world record, and steadily build one of the most respected names in performance engineering has been its own multi-decade story. Choosing to honor the CC8S specifically, rather than designing something entirely disconnected from that history, signals that Christian has never lost sight of where the company actually came from, even as it has grown into something the 22-year-old version of him could barely have imagined. The car's continued presence at events around the world, including high-profile appearances such as the Miami Concours, has only reinforced how personal this milestone remains for both Christian and the broader community of enthusiasts who have followed the brand for decades. Owners and fans alike have described meeting him at these events as a genuinely warm experience, a chance to connect directly with the person behind a brand that, for most of its existence, operated as the underdog in a field dominated by long-established European manufacturers. In many ways, the CC850 functions as a closing of one loop and the opening of another. It honors the car that proved Koenigsegg belonged on the same stage as McLaren, Bugatti, and every other legacy hypercar maker, while simultaneously demonstrating just how much engineering ambition the company still has left. 50 units, expanded to 70. Each one a rolling reminder that the boy who watched a stop-motion film about a homemade race car eventually built an entire universe around that same stubborn belief. And on his 50th birthday, decided the best way to celebrate was to build it all over again, just a little better than before. there is a broader lesson sitting quietly underneath all of this. One that extends well beyond cars or engineering. Most people spend milestone birthdays reflecting on time past. Christian spent his proving that the same restless curiosity which built an entire company from nothing had not faded with age. The CC850 is not simply a celebration of 50 years lived. It is a statement that the version of him who refused to accept no for an answer at 22 is still very much present at 50, still building, still pushing past whatever anyone else assumes the limits should be. That's the story behind one of the most personal birthday gifts ever built. A hypercar that traces all the way back to a 5-year-old watching a film about a homemade race car and a 22-year-old nobody believed in. 50 years later, the doubt was gone, replaced by a world record, a respected legacy brand, and a car built almost entirely by his own team's hands. What would you build for your own 50th birthday? Let us know in the comments. If stories like this inspire you, give this video a like, and subscribe to Stars of America, because there's another legendary build we can't wait to share next.